So our next speakers, it's two of them actually. It will be the entire PACD podcast. Peter Coffin and Miss ACD will be getting up and giving a presentation, and they bring their podcast is just charming. They talk about their life, they talk about politics, they talk about anti-imperialism and Marxism. They've done a great job exposing the synthetic left, and they've got Peter wrote a great new book on cancel culture, which is available in the back, and they're going to be speaking about cancel culture and synthetic left social fascism. So we're excited to hear what they have to say. Great folks, Peter Coffin and Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor.
Thank you, Caleb. That was great. Thank you all for showing up. This has been fantastic so far. All of the previous speakers did a great job. We're really excited to be here. My name is Peter Coffin, like was said. This is my partner in podcasting and life, Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. I am... There you go. I'm the P, she's the ACD. Together it's PACD. That spells out packed. That's what we do. We pack a lot of information in a little space. I'm an author. I wrote a book, as was introduced, but this one's a lot more qualified than me.
That's not true. But hi, I'm Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, and go by that pseudonym because I am an academic. I am a scientist practitioner and PhD candidate in the field of clinical health psychology and health disparities researcher, who looks at how different facets of social and economic marginalization differentially impact chronic illness outcomes. And I'm also a mental health practitioner focused on providing free mental health services to the uninsured and underinsured. Also known as a Noswell red brown fascist.
See, anyway, we're here to talk about cancel culture today. What do people usually think about when they hear the words cancel culture?
The liberals!
Liberals? Radlibs. Kamala Harris. If only. So, cancel culture is often regarded as, it has the word culture in it, and it is not that. It is certainly not a set of behaviors or artistic norms or any of that type of thing. And the way that Wikipedia defines it also is that it's a modern form of social ostracization. Now, it's neither of these things. You can get a little bit closer by going into the Urban Dictionary definition of it, which is the stopping of giving support to various individuals or brands, what have you. It doesn't have to be a person, by the way. It could be a brand, could be a famous person, could be a firefighter, could be anybody. If you say something that is against the hegemony, or if you say something that is against the social norm, or you do something that isn't, it doesn't have to be bad, it can be bad, but if it's interpreted as bad, you can be canceled. It is not just a lack of support either, it is more akin to a social death. That is the end of you. It's not simply a modern form of ostracization in which somebody is thrust out of social or professional circles. It exists as, in my opinion, a logical and necessary outcome of capitalist society, which depends on a market fetishizing ideology of neoliberalism for justification. Basically, everything in the world is commodified. Relationships and interactions have become transactionalized, even Uberfied in some various corners. But I think cancel culture is more of a subscription dynamic playing out in social spaces, basically transforming people into a mix of consumer, marketer, police, judge, jury, prisoner, and guard. It's, like I said, the consolidation and Uberification of these roles in society and a reward for keeping people in line. Why is it a big deal? Because it takes the focus away from systems and shifts it to interpersonal dynamics. Let's say you acknowledge the ruling class as an enemy. Maybe you might get canceled for that. It's something that, it might happen in a lot of different ways, but you can get into big trouble for that. We're going to talk a little bit about how that applies to Ukraine in a little while. It's a redirection of anger to an inappropriate target, and it allows the ruling class to look good as well as profit by maintaining progressive aesthetics.
So before embarking on this connection to imperialism that cancel culture has, I first wanted to say that, talking about this social cultural phenomenon is completely useless and inconsequential if we don't connect it to the economic base of imperialism. And I know that probably seems like a far jump. Cancel culture, we think about Louis C.K. and Harvey Weinstein and these celebrities who may or may not have done horrible things.
Caleb Maupin.
And Peter Coffin. But what we really want to relate this to is, as Peter said, a social phenomenon that is a superstructural product of our economic base of imperialism and how it works to reinforce the capitalist dynamics that take place in the stage of capitalism. So before relating cancel culture to that, I want to bring out our good friend, Vladimir Lenin, defining imperialism through imperialism and the split in socialism, which has 5 key characteristics. We have the consolidation of monopolistic capital and cartels, trusts, and syndicates, and consolidating monopoly industrial capital in the hands of fewer and increasingly fewer capitalists. Then we have partitioning through big banks, dominating the world stage, and then the emergence of bank capital and monopoly industrial capital to develop finance capital, which...
You're canceled. That's anti-Semitic.
Well, finance capital that is used to partition the world economically and then territorially partition the world such that that's complete and just kind of re-arbitrated over and over again in the hands of finance capital at the hands of a few countries. So how does cancel culture relate to that? Again, these things seem like they're pretty far away, probably at first blush, but as Marxist-Leninists, we like to approach things through a historical and dialectical materialist context. As always, when we think about dialectics, we think of 3 major things. One is resolving contradictions through synthesis of thesis and antithesis, and resolving those as society is constantly in flux, based on a specific set of historical conditions at any given time that's constantly evolving. And that's the second tenet of dialectics, is things always being in flux. And then the third, most obvious, in this situation, is that everything is interconnected, especially all superstructural products that emerge from the economic base on which our society rests, which is what imperialism is. Imperialism is the cause of poverty. It's the cause of economic inequity. It's the cause of working class struggle in this historical cultural zeitgeist. It's the result of disproportionate marginalization by various superstructural vectors of race, ethnicity, sexual and gender minority status, disability status. Imperialism is the cause of that differential marginalization that we see, and at large, the marginalization of the working class. What cancel culture does is it completely detracts from systemic analysis of correctly attributing the problems that we see to imperialism and late-stage capitalism, which are the actual causes of these working class issues. Again, from all these individuals, whether they're celebrities who have done abhorrent and awful things, or just your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner table, or somebody who's not really done anything but just happens to be a target.
Your uncle, who is Harvey Weinstein.
Well, okay.
Uncle Weinstein.
That's not true. I feel like people might misinterpret that, but
It's true. It's really not their uncle.
okay. But from all these individual targets that we can have, whether they're people with a lot of their own individual wealth, or if they're just your average day working class person, regardless, they're false targets of the causes of these problems. And they result in this essentialization of individual people as bad, inherently evil entities that we can scapegoat all of these issues on, rather than directing our focus to the economic base of our society that is causing the oppression that we experience as a working class. And that is so convenient to propose an individual market solution within our neoliberal empire that incentivizes condemning anything that contradicts the mainstream narrative. It's promoting moral superiority over material truth. That's not to say that people that have been canceled in the media are anti-imperialist heroes or even good people. A lot of times people are canceled in our social cultural zeitgeist for doing negative things. But
Like your uncle.
and there are also people who are canceled because they're challenging the mainstream narrative. And another way to think about cancellation is thinking about the way that people are discredited. Like Caleb Maupin, for example, is Russian state-affiliated media. So not all canceled people are heroes, but at the very least, they're false targets. So at its best, cancel culture paradigm is, designed to call attention to people doing negative things or engaging in negative behavior, possibly. At worst, it's a paradigm that directs attention away to a systemic understanding of our capitalistic base and towards demonizing individuals to promote sanctimonious individuals in a way that's really profitable and makes people feel good while they're completely devoid of material analysis of what's actually happening and what's actually causing the suffering that we experience, which can be very easily applied to Iraq and Russia, and the way that people talking about those narratives in a way that resists what's being presented to us in Western media as being discredited. So I'll hand it off to you again.
All right. So, in the case of imperialism, there's a very specific narrative that justifies imperialism. In the case of Ukraine, we've seen it very much. You're not allowed to talk about the Nazis. You're not allowed to talk about the deaths in the Donbass republics. You're not allowed to talk about that stuff. The way that it works is state and capital starts to put out a narrative. Then that gets disseminated through media capital, which then goes and is further disseminated by basically a chain of influencers, big ones down to small ones. And that narrative gets accepted from the ability for these influencers to act as experts. They don't necessarily have to be experts, obviously. I'm pretty sure you've seen somebody tweet about Ukraine from a perspective that they labeled as unquestionable fact that then came out to be wrong. We will talk about a very specific one in just a second. But what happens is if you contradict that narrative to one of these levels of influencers, or it will end up causing them to push back, because that is their reputation as an expert on the line. The incentive then is to make you look like a bad person. It's to make you look like you can't possibly know what you're talking about, that you can't possibly be a reliable source, that you are a bad person, you associate with bad people, you do bad things, because they don't have an argument against the factual thing that you're saying. That then can also travel back up the chain to bigger influencers who have been pushing the exact same narrative. If this interaction starts to get more attention, if you start to get canceled hard but don't just give up and apologize or whatever that you're supposed to do, I don't know. You have the rejection of this narrative, the established narrative, and that makes you a target. Like I said, these are market incentives. The reward for canceling you is given in the form of attention, metrics, engagement, ultimately social connections. In terms of a materialist analysis, which is oftentimes very inconvenient for that type of narrative, it's kind of the perfect conduit for discrediting that kind of thing, because they focus so hard on individuals and who individuals are connected to and what they say, what their past is, if they've ever been wrong on anything ever. And it's much easier to take down an individual.
Right. So who does this affect negatively? Obviously all of us. All the working class.
Everyone here.
Everyone here, but all of the working class. Even if they're constituents of the working class that are engaging in this sort of cancellation behavior, there's sort of a qualitative and quantitative way to look at this. Obviously, somebody in the bourgeoisie is uncancelable. Harvey Weinstein, for example, walked out of his situation with $25 million.
Harvey, your Uncle Harvey, he's one of the worst. Like, he's one of the worst. In terms of bourgeoisie, he's probably one of the worst cases. Like, he lost his company, he got divorced, he was sued by a number of people, he went to prison, he has a prison sentence of 21 years, and he walked away from that situation with $25 million.
Right, so uncancelable.
Yeah.
And it goes to show that this, even for individuals in the working class who are engaging in this sort of, whether it's behavioral or cognitive, this condemnation of individuals in the working class, even if they're condemning people in the ruling class, how ineffective that is, even if they think that they're engaging in a noble cause, and also directing their attention away from actually targeting what needs to be targeted. Of course, within the working class, there are quantitative differences in how much monetary capital that people have, such that the more currency you have, the more attention, the more money, the more capital that you have, the lower effect that that kind of thing will have on you as an individual being canceled. But it's still collectively, from a qualitative perspective, in comparison to the bourgeoisie being uncancelable, negatively impacts the working class, as we're not taking the right approach. We're not taking the right approach to the problems that we're experiencing economically. We're not taking the right approach to class struggle if we're targeting this individually driven, market-based solution to condemning individuals that might make us feel really good and morally superior and sanctimonious for a while, but will not rid us of the economic base that is imperialism. And so cancel culture is a really useful tool that the ruling class uses to sustain the superstructural narrative that supports the state, that supports capital, that maintains its power and its narrative in the media as well, and what information is disseminated to us. It renders working class individuals engaging in this kind of cultural phenomenon to be very useful pawns in sustaining what they want to uphold.
There is cause for optimism, though. We saw recently a set of events that I will simply describe as the ghost of Kiev. That was
It was a choice.
It was a choice, yes. It was definitely a choice on the part of the people who started that. When you tell people that a fighter jet is out above Ukraine and just defeating various Russian fighter jets on its own with video game numbers, it shouldn't be strange when it turns out to be video game footage. It is an expected outcome. But anyway, the way that this went down was this chain that I described earlier: state and capital putting out a narrative, media capital perpetuating it, and your chain of influencers pushing it. This story happened so fast that it kind of exposed a way that you can get around both cancellation and the imperialist narrative. In that as soon as it was disproven, state and capital and the media capital, they all just silenced on the ghost of Kiev. In fact, the New York Times even went as far to tell us that it was important that you be able to blend myth-making with fact to maintain morale.
Gotta keep Nazi morale up, apparently.
Yeah, you gotta keep the Nazi morale up. It's really important that the Nazis feel good in 2022.
Clipped and shipped.
Yeah. But this happened so fast that once the larger concentrations of capital shut up about this, the influencers who were not all informed on it continued to push the narrative that the ghost of Kiev was real. And then when they eventually got called on it, they started doing the whole "just let us have this," which is the worst thing in the world when they start saying that. It's like, so you know something is fake, but you want us to let you think it's real?
It's a choice.
It is a choice. It is not a good choice to make, though. Anyway, so this happens quickly, and they're canceling people over an event which is fake. Like they're saying, you're saying this is video game footage, but this is a guy who is sacrificing his time and possibly his life to save the Ukrainian people. And it's like, no, it's video game footage. Here's the news story about it being video game footage. And they're like, you're a bad person. And that's the end of that. It stops. They completely let go of that narrative. They walk away. They pretend it hasn't happened. And the entire mainstream narrative shifts on it. Like if you talk about the Ghost of Kiev thing, they don't act as though it is something that matters anymore. They can't use it. It's a null concept at this point. And in terms of cancellation, if we could figure out ways to engineer that speed of events where the mainstream narratives that they are canceling people for rejecting are disproven quickly and disseminated quickly. And that requires obviously more than any one individual. That requires a lot of people. There is a chance it can be beaten in that way.
Right, so to kind of summarize everything that we've been talking about, we'll bring it back to Caleb Maupin's work. This is a way that the synthetic left serves imperialism, and that it utilizes cancel culture as a tool to reinforce the narratives that maintain our late-stage economic structure. They uphold the narratives of the state, they hold up narratives of capital, and all of those 5 tenets that we described in imperialism, anything that is spoken that resists the economic system or economic form is cancelable or subject to discreditation. And so what can we do in this? We don't want to propose this sort of individually oriented solution because the problem is individually oriented. That doesn't work, obviously. We're not trying to promote consumer activism with information. But hold the line. Hold the line on information that you know to be true. Investigate the material reality of situations. Stick to a dialectical and historical materialist method. And that can be a really important tool for us as communists. Are we allowed to say that we're communists?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. Just don't tell your uncle.
Yeah. As communists. That is so critical for us to do. Especially in the spaces that we're in, there's the market solution incentive to go against that. You're going to get a lot of pushback on that. Hold the line. Apply material analysis.
There's not any one specific solution in this for all of our problems, but we need to be able to get to support each other on the resistance to these narratives, and we need to have people understand that we can tell when something is fake. Thank you.
Tremendous presentation.